The fire in the center of the dusty town had begun to die, but the fear it left behind still clung to the air like smoke. Folks whispered about what happened, yet no one stepped forward to help the woman who stood trembling near the old well. Her dress torn at the shoulder, her breath shaking. She had always carried herself with quiet strength. It's the kind that stayed steady through long winters and lonely nights. But tonight, even that strength wavered. She was a widow trying to live her life in peace, and the town had never made it easy for her. The sunset cast a long orange glow across the cabins as riders gathered in small groups, tending not to notice her. They didn't want trouble. They didn't want to get involved. They didn't want to stand up against the men who caused the chaos that left her shaken. So they did what they always did. They looked away, but not everyone turned his back. From the edge of the settlement, beneath the shadow of a charred barn, an Apache warrior watched the scene with steady, dark eyes. He stood tall and silent, his hair tied back, a carved spear resting against his shoulder. He had the stillness of the mountains and the alertness of a wolf. His presence alone made the men near him shift uneasily, but he didn't seem bothered by their looks. He had come into town earlier that day for supplies and nothing more. Or so he thought. Then he saw her. The widow tried to remain upright, trying to hide her shaking hands. She didn't cry. She didn't break. But her eyes told the story. Something terrible had happened. Something no one wanted to claim or confront. She pressed her palm over her ribs, as if trying to quiet the pounding inside her chest. The Apache moved before he even realized. He had made the choice. His steps were silent across the dirt road. The men who had gathered near the saloon stiffened, some stepping back when he passed. He didn't look at them. He didn't need to. His focus stayed locked on the woman, who finally noticed him when he stood close enough for her to feel his shadow fall across her. She tried to speak, to say she was fine, to pretend nothing happened. But the moment she opened her mouth, her voice cracked before a single word escaped. He lifted a hand, gentle but firm. "Don't speak," he said. His voice low and calm, something in his tone made her freeze. Not out of fear, but safety. Real, unexpected safety. After everything that happened, after the way the town watched and did nothing, the quiet strength in his voice felt like the first solid ground beneath her feet. She swallowed hard, tears burning behind her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. He stepped a little closer, shielding her from the prying eyes around them. His presence alone seemed to push people back, as if the fear they felt for him was suddenly convenient for her protection. A breeze brushed through the street, carrying the scent of smoke and pine. The Apache studied the marks on her arm, recognizing signs of struggle. His jaw tightened, not in a way that scared her, but in a way that promised he would not ignore what he saw. The widow tried to steady her breathing. She whispered something soft, barely shaped into words. His hand lifted again, steadying her with the same calm strength. "You are safe now," he murmured. Safe. The word felt foreign. She had not felt safe in months, maybe years. Not since her husband passed and left her with land others wanted, land some men believed they could take if they pushed her hard enough. Trouble had been building around her ranch, small at first, then louder. Threatening knocks on the door. Tools taken. Animals let loose. And tonight, the warning had turned into something far worse. Something meant to break her. But she hadn't broken. She had run. And somehow, she had made it to the town center, only to be ignored by the people who claimed to be her neighbors. The Apache held out his hand, not touching her, but offering. She hesitated, torn between fear of appearing weak and fear of returning to the empty trail alone. For a moment, she simply looked at him. His eyes were steady, neither soft nor harsh. Simply certain, she placed her hand in his. The warmth of his grip surprised her. Strong without being forceful. Protective without taking control. He helped her step away from the well, guiding her toward the safer side of the road. The men who had been watching started to whisper among themselves. Some didn't like the idea of an Apache stepping in. Some didn't like the reminder of what they failed to do. The widow's breath grew uneven as the Apache warrior led her deeper into the line of trees. Away from the burning trail the attackers had left behind, the quiet between them settled heavy, broken only by the wind brushing through the pines. She kept glancing back, hoping the flames had not reached her small cabin, hoping the trouble that struck the town had not followed her into these woods. The warrior slowed his pace just enough to make sure she stayed close. He did not speak, but his steady steps said more than words could. She wanted to ask who he was, why he had stepped in when no one else dared. But the sound of hooves far behind them warned her that this was not the moment to question anything. When they reached a narrow creek, the warrior finally looked back at her. His dark eyes held the silent command he had used earlier. She felt it again, the sense that he understood danger before she even sensed it. He raised his hand, urging her to stay low. The cold water soaked through her torn dress as she crouched near the bank, but she stayed still. She trusted him more than the men chasing them. She trusted the strength in his voice when he had told her not to speak. It had not been a warning. It had felt like protection. The widow, known in town as Lyra, watched him study the woods. His jaw tightened as he listened to distant voices. She could not see the riders, but she felt the fear they carried. The incident at the market had happened so fast. One moment she was buying cloth, the next she heard shouting, then a fight, then fire. Someone had fired a shot. Someone else had blamed her late husband for old debts he never owed. The mix of anger and fear had turned the small town wild. She only remembered stumbling back, hearing threats, hearing her name used as if she had caused the trouble. Then the Apache warrior had stepped between her and the men, his stance solid like a wall. She did not know why he had done it. She only remembered the way he said those quiet words before pulling her away from the chaos. Now, as he stood with one foot in the shallow creek, spear raised, she realized he was not only strong but sharp in spirit. He understood danger in a way most men did not. The whole region had known of his people, but few knew any Apache by name. She did not know his name, yet it felt like she had known his presence long before this moment. There was something about him that felt familiar in the strangest way, like a memory she could not place. He motioned her to cross the creek. She followed, the cold water biting her skin. Her heart pounded as the sound of the riders grew faint. It seemed the warrior had led her far enough that their tracks were confused by the stream. Still, she sensed the danger had not ended. When they reached the other side, he took the lead again. She noticed a thin scar across his shoulder, a mark that looked like it came from an old blade. It made her wonder what battles he had survived long before saving her. They walked until the woods opened into a quiet clearing. A lone horse waited there, tied to a fallen branch. The brown mare lifted its head the moment it saw him. Lyra hesitated, unsure if he expected her to ride with him or go her own way. She did not know where her own way even was anymore. The town was no longer safe. Her cabin might already be gone. The people she once trusted had turned on her in a heartbeat. The warrior stepped beside the horse, placed a calm hand on its neck. Then he looked at her again, his expression steady but unreadable. He reached into a small leather pouch hanging from the saddle and pulled out a strip of cloth. He held it toward her. She realized it was meant to replace the torn piece on her arm where she had scraped herself during their escape. She accepted it, whispering a quiet thank you. He did not reply. Instead, he watched the tree line again. While tying the cloth around her arm, she tried to make sense of everything. How had a simple trip to town turned into this? Why had the men attacked her? Why had they blamed her dead husband Joran for debts he never owed? She remembered Joran as a gentle man, hard-working, honest. When he passed, the town had offered kind words. None of them had hinted at trouble. So why had everything changed so suddenly? She wanted to ask the Apache warrior if he knew something she did not. But she remembered his first words to her. She don't speak. Maybe he knew that someone among those men had planned this trouble for days. Maybe speaking too soon would reveal the wrong truth to the wrong person. Maybe silence was the only protection she had now. He mounted the horse and then reached out his hand to her. She hesitated again, not out of fear of him, but out of fear of what leaving with him meant. Riding with an Apache warrior would draw even more attention. The town was already on edge and people were quick to judge. But if she stayed alone, she had no one to shield her from those who wanted her harmed. She placed her hand in his. He pulled her up with ease, settling her in front of him. His presence behind her felt like a shield. They rode through the clearing and down a narrow valley path. The farther they went, the more the world around them changed. The burning smoke from the town faded behind them, replaced by the quiet of untouched land. The air smelled of pine and earth. For a moment, she let herself breathe. But the quiet did not bring peace. It brought questions she was not ready to face. As the horse climbed a rocky slope, she finally found the courage to speak. Her voice was low. She asked him why he had saved her. His hand tightened slightly on the reins. He did not answer right away. She wondered if he even understood her language well enough to reply. Then, after a long moment, he spoke a single word. Danger. His tone held a weight she did not understand yet. Danger from whom? From the riders? From the men in town? Or from someone else? She did not dare ask again. The warrior's silence told her that the truth was deeper than she guessed. Maybe he knew something about the men who had attacked her. Maybe he knew why they blamed her husband. Maybe he knew their real motives. The thought sent a chill through her. They reached a ridge where the land dropped into a long valley covered in tall golden grass. The warrior slowed the horse and surveyed the horizon. His gaze locked on something she could not see. When she followed his stare, she noticed a faint trail of dust rising far behind them on the lower path. Her heart tightened. The riders had not given up after all. The Apache warrior leaned close enough that she felt his breath near her ear. He told her to hold on. His voice remained calm, but there was a sharp edge in it, a warning shaped by experience. She gripped the saddle and braced herself. The horse bolted forward, weaving down the ridge with skill only a well-trained animal possessed. Wind whipped her hair across her face. The pounding of the horse's hooves echoed through the valley. She looked back and saw movement in the distance. The riders were gaining. She could not see their faces, but she recognized the threat. They were the same men who had stood at the market, shouting accusations at her. The same men who had watched her with spite. The warrior pressed the horse harder, guiding it through narrow passes and sharp turns that made her breath catch. Still, the riders followed. She wondered how far they were willing to go. She wondered what they wanted with her. The warrior seemed to understand their intent better than she did. As they approached a cluster of boulders near the edge of the valley, the warrior slowed the horse and then dismounted, pulling her down with him. He whispered for her to stay hidden behind the rocks. She obeyed, crouching low. He stood tall, his spear firm in his hand. His stance carried the quiet confidence of someone who had faced danger. Many times before, she tried to listen for the riders, but heard nothing. The silence grew thicker with each passing second. The warrior waited without moving, his gaze locked on the path they had come from. Lyra felt her pulse in her throat as if her heart had climbed higher, like afraid of the unknown. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the valley. She kept watching him, noticing the tension in his shoulders, the readiness in his stance. He was expecting someone. Someone he recognized. Someone she had never imagined would be after her. A faint crack echoed through the valley, like a branch snapping under a boot. The warrior shifted his grip on the spear. She pressed her hand to her chest, trying to steady her breath. Another sound followed, this time closer. The riders were not far. Then the warrior looked back at her for the first time since they had taken cover. His voice was low but steady. He told her to trust him. There was something in his tone she had not heard before, something that hinted at a truth he had not shared yet. A truth about the men chasing them. A truth about why they wanted her. Before she could ask, the sound of footsteps approached the rocks. The shadows grew longer. The air thickened with danger, and she realized the warrior was preparing for something far bigger than she. Understood the riders were not merely chasing her. They were searching for something else. Something connected to her late husband. Something the warrior knew, but she did not. And whatever that truth was, it was about to reveal itself in the most unexpected way. Lyra pressed her back against the cold stone, trying to quiet her breath, even though her chest rose and fell in a trembling rhythm. Every sound from the valley carried a weight that made her nerves pull tight. The Apache warrior stepped one pace forward, spear angled low, watching the place where the riders would appear. His calm stood in deep contrast to the storm of fear stirring through her. She did not know what he was expecting or how many men were coming, but she sensed he had faced such moments before. She hoped his strength would be enough for both of them. A distant clatter of stones rolled down a slope, followed by the snort of a horse. Lyra's pulse jumped. She leaned closer to the edge of the boulder and saw a silhouette move near the ridge. A second figure appeared beside it. The riders were cautious now, no longer rushing, no longer loud. They were hunting. She realized they knew she had escaped with help, and that made them more dangerous. The warrior's jaw tightened as he watched the shadows. He raised one finger toward her in a silent order to stay hidden. She nodded, though her hands shook as she gripped her torn dress. As she crouched there, her thoughts drifted back to the strange day her troubles began. Days before the incident at the market, she remembered overhearing whispers outside the saloon. Men spoke of land disputes, old claims, missing papers. At the time she ignored it. She had been grieving her husband and trying to carry on alone. Now, she wondered if those secrets had something to do with her being chased. She recalled Joran once mentioning a box of documents he kept hidden. He said they belonged to his father before him, something about old property lines and promises made long ago. She never saw that box again after his death. No one else mentioned it. As she adjusted the cloth tied around her arm, a frightening thought struck her. What if the men chasing her believed she knew something about those papers? What if they thought she had the box? The idea chilled her. She looked at the warrior, wondering if he somehow knew about it too. Maybe that was why he pulled her away without hesitation. Maybe he was trying to protect something bigger than just her life. The warrior suddenly shifted his footing. A rider stepped out from behind a tall rock, scanning the valley with narrowed eyes. He carried a rifle low against his leg. His expression was tight, as if frustration had pushed him past anger. Lyra recognized him from the market. His name was Dren, a ranch hand who had always looked at her with a strange sort of envy. Next to him came two more men, their clothes dusty and their faces tense. They were not just searching, they were ready for a fight. The warrior stood still, as a cut tree. Lyra prayed the men would keep riding, but Dren's horse neighed sharply and turned its head toward the boulders. The rider frowned and slowed. Lyra gripped the stone harder, her nails scraping across it. She knew at any moment the men would notice the fresh hoofprints leading to the rocks. The warrior finally spoke, his voice calm but edged with warning. He told her not to move, reminding her of the trust he demanded earlier. She stayed pressed against the stone, watching him prepare, his stance shifting as if he memorized every angle of the terrain. Then something unexpected happened. A whistle echoed across the ridge, soft, almost gentle, but distinct enough that the riders instantly turned their heads. It came from the far side of the valley. Dren muttered something she could not hear and signaled to his men. The three riders turned away from the boulders and followed the sound. Lyra exhaled slowly, confusion mixing with relief. The warrior looked toward the ridge, eyes sharp. He seemed to recognize the whistle. The tone in the air had shifted from threat to curiosity. He motioned her to follow as he moved deeper behind the rocks, guiding her through a narrow path. When they reached a shaded hollow, he paused and watched the ridge again. After a moment, he spoke a quiet name. She did not know who it belonged to, but the way he said it felt heavy with meaning. Whoever made that whistle was not a stranger to him. Lyra opened her mouth to ask him what it meant, but he lifted his hand gently, telling her again to stay quiet. She obeyed, though the questions tangled tightly in her mind. She wondered if another Apache was nearby, someone who had been tracking them or watching the riders. That idea made her heart beat faster, not out of fear, but out of uncertainty. She had never been this close to Apache land, and now she was depending on their help. They traveled deeper into a narrow canyon, where the walls rose high and the air grew cooler. The warrior kept checking the ridges, listening with the skill of a man raised in wild land. Lyra followed closely, trying not to fall behind. She wished she understood what he was thinking. His silence felt purposeful, not distant. It was as if he carried a truth he could not speak yet, or one he did not want her to carry, as they reached a flat stretch of ground. She finally gathered courage to ask him a question. Her voice came out soft, careful. She wanted to know why the riders were after her. She wanted to know if he knew something she did not. For a moment he did not answer. Then he told her that the men spoke of land, of boundaries, of promises broken long ago. His words struck her sharply. She realized he had understood far more than she thought while they fled. He said her husband's name in a low tone. Hearing Joran's name from his voice made her freeze. The warrior said that before Joran died, he had crossed paths with a man from his tribe, a man who carried old grievances against the settlers and the land they claimed. Joran had tried to help mend an old dispute between Apache and townsfolk. He had carried messages, traveled through valleys, tried to build peace. But someone in town did not want that peace. Someone wanted the land for themselves. Lyra's thoughts spun. She never knew any of this. Joran had never told her. The warrior continued, saying that the men now chasing her believed she held the last piece of whatever agreement Joran had made, something they feared or wanted for themselves. The mention of the mysterious box returned to her mind. She wondered if that was what they were seeking. Before she could ask more, a shadow passed along the canyon wall. The warrior stepped in front of her, spear angled toward the figure approaching from the ridge. A man appeared, tall and steady, dressed in Apache leather. He walked toward them with calm confidence. Lyra felt her stomach tighten. Unsure if this man meant harm or help, the warrior lowered his spear slightly, recognizing him. The newcomer greeted him with a respectful nod. They spoke in their own language, their tones changing from cautious to serious. Lyra stood silently, watching them exchange words she could not understand, but she sensed their conversation held more than strategy. It held history. It held warnings. Finally, the newcomer glanced at her. His gaze was not cruel, but it was sharp in a way that made her feel seen in ways she was not used to. He asked the warrior a question, and the warrior answered with her name. Lyra realized this man likely knew nothing of her life, yet he looked at her as if she had stepped into a story older than she imagined. The newcomer pointed toward the distant ridge where the riders had been. He explained that the men were not only searching for her, but searching for something hidden months before her husband died. Something that could change control of a wide stretch of land. Something both Apache and townsfolk had reason to guard or fear. Lyra tried to steady her voice as she asked what that thing was. The newcomer studied her for a long moment before answering. He said there was an old map, drawn long before the town was built. A map marking a place that both sides had argued over for decades. He said Joran had been given the map for safekeeping by an elder who trusted him. But when the elder died, the map disappeared. Lyra felt cold. She had never seen such a map. If Joran had hidden it, he had not told her. The warrior looked at her as if asking silently whether she knew where it might be. She shook her head slowly. The newcomer then explained something that twisted her heart tighter. He said the men chasing her believed the map was still with her. And even worse, they believed she might have discovered it after her husband's death. They thought she might trade it or sell it. They thought she was worth hunting for that reason alone. Lyra felt her legs weaken. She leaned against the canyon wall, trying to process the truth. She whispered that she did not know anything about a map. The warrior stepped closer, his voice steady as he told her he believed her. But he said the riders would not. That made the danger real in a way she had not fully understood until now. The newcomer said they could not stay in the canyon. He said the riders had split into two groups and were circling the valley. The Apache warriors would need to move quickly if they wanted to protect both the land and Lyra. The warrior beside her nodded, then turned toward her with a look that carried both warning and reassurance. He told her they were going to a place she had never seen, a place where truth would be revealed whether she was ready or not. And as the shadows darkened along the canyon walls, Lyra felt the weight of her husband's secrets pressing closer, pulling her deeper into a conflict she never knew existed. Lyra followed the two Apache warriors through the narrow path that cut between steep canyon walls. Shadows stretched long, turning the rock faces into tall watchmen that seemed to lean inward, as if listening. Every step echoed lightly, reminding her how small the three of them were in this vast land. The warrior who saved her stayed close at her side, his presence steady, like he was guarding her with every breath he took. The other warrior, the newcomer, moved ahead with the confidence of someone who understood the terrain as well as he understood. His own heartbeat? She tried to match their pace. Though the uncertainty of what waited ahead pressed heavy on her shoulders, the mention of her late husband's hidden map, the land dispute, the whispers she had dismissed in town, all circled her thoughts like a growing storm. Each piece seemed to belong to a truth she was still not ready to face. She could feel tension building around her, woven between each step they took. They reached a slope where the canyon opened into a stretch of wild land. The grass moved in waves, stirred by a wind that carried the scent of pine and distant smoke. The warrior stopped and scanned the horizon, raising his hand to shield his eyes from the lowering sun. His expression shifted. Lyra followed his gaze and felt her breath tighten when she saw what he saw. A group of riders moved along the far ridge, their silhouettes dark against the sky. The distance between them was shrinking. The newcomer spoke in a low tone, his words carrying a sense of urgency. The warrior nodded and motioned for Lyra to follow quickly. She felt the shift in the moment. They were no longer simply moving through the land. They were being driven toward something. She did not know if it was safety or danger, but she had no choice except to trust the warrior guiding her. They moved down a rocky trail, following a path that twisted through thickets of brush. Lyra's dress snagged on branches more than once. Each time the warrior slowed, freeing the fabric without a word. She felt grateful, yet aware of the strain building in his posture. He was listening to every sound, watching every shadow, protecting her while preparing for whatever confrontation might be coming. As the trees thinned, they entered a clearing where an old cabin sat near a small stream. Its roof sagged slightly and the wood had darkened with age. The place looked forgotten, almost hidden by nature itself. But there was something about it that did not feel abandoned. Lyra sensed memories within its walls, memories she could not name. The newcomer pointed toward the cabin. The warrior stepped ahead, checking around the structure before signaling that it was safe. Lyra followed cautiously. The door creaked as the warrior pushed it open, revealing a dim interior filled with dust and the faint scent of dried herbs. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the wooden walls, casting thin beams across the floor. The cabin held nothing more than a table, a few stools, an empty shelf, and a woven mat rolled in the corner. Yet, something about it felt purposeful, as if it had been used once for meetings or secrets, as if it had held moments that shaped paths now leading toward her. The newcomer explained that this place once belonged to an elder from their tribe, the same elder who had trusted Joran with the old map. Lyra's heart tightened. She stepped closer to the table, imagining her husband standing there years before, discussing land agreements and peace with people she never met. She wondered why Joran never told her about any of this. She wondered what burden he had carried alone. Before she could ask anything, the warrior motioned her to stay quiet. He moved to the window and peered through a narrow gap in the wood. His shoulders stiffened. The newcomer stepped beside him, and for a moment they exchanged a look that said more than words ever could. Lyra felt her pulse quicken. She approached them slowly and saw what they saw. The riders had reached the lower trail, much closer now. Their horses moved with intent, their bodies leaning forward, searching. They spread out across the land, forming a wide sweep that would soon reach the clearing. Fear gripped Lyra, sharp and cold. She turned to the warrior, desperate for an answer he had not yet given. He stepped away from the window and spoke with calm urgency. He said they could not stay in the cabin. The riders would find it too quickly. They needed to move deeper into the forest and reach a place his tribe used for hiding during troubled times. A place only a few knew existed. The newcomer nodded, then stepped outside to check the path ahead. The warrior urged Lyra forward gently. She followed, though her legs felt like they might give out beneath her. Every sound from the forest blended with the memory of shouts from the market, fire, of chaos, of the moment her life changed without warning. She could not outrun the fear. She could choose to keep going. They moved along the stream, staying low beneath branches. The warrior guided her carefully, adjusting their pace whenever the riders' distant calls echoed through the land. They reached a narrow opening between rocks and slipped through it. The path beyond was darker, shaded by a dense canopy of tall trees. Lyra heard the sound of water running deeper underground. The forest felt ancient, wild, untouched by any townsfolk. The newcomer stopped at a large fallen tree and crouched beside it, listening. Lyra watched him, sensing his connection to the land. He seemed to know what each sound meant, what each breeze carried. When he stood again, his expression held a trace of concern. He said the riders had changed direction. They were no longer searching blindly. They had signs, tracks, something pointing them toward this part of the forest. Lyra felt her stomach twist. She looked at the warrior, hoping for some reassurance. He met her gaze, and though his expression remained steady, she sensed his worry. He placed a hand on her shoulder briefly, grounding her with a simple gesture that spoke more comfort than any words could offer. As they moved deeper, the trees grew taller. The land dipped into a hollow where a small pool rested beneath a curtain of hanging vines. The water shimmered in soft light, reflecting the leaves above. The warrior said they needed to rest here briefly. Lyra sat beside the pool, dipping her hand into the cool water. She watched her reflection ripple and break. She barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked tired, frightened, yet stronger than she felt. The warrior and the newcomer stepped aside to speak quietly. Lyra tried not to listen, but their tones carried enough meaning. The riders were moving faster. The land dispute was not just anger. It was power. Joran had been caught between Apache and settlers, trying to protect both sides. His death may not have been an accident, as she once believed. The thought made her heart sink. Heavy with pain and confusion, she turned the water over her fingers, trying to steady herself. She thought of the small cabin she once lived in, the meals she cooked, the quiet evenings, the stories Joran used to tell her about the land, though he never told her everything. Maybe he had wanted to shield her. Maybe he feared the truth would place her in danger. And now that danger had found her anyway. The newcomer returned and said they needed to move again. Lyra stood, wiping her hands on her dress. The warrior took the lead this time, taking them up a steep incline where the trees opened slightly, revealing a high ridge. From there, they could see across miles of land. Lyra scanned the horizon and saw movement below. The riders were entering the forest. The warrior's expression hardened. He guided her across the ridge, moving quickly but silently. Lyra followed close behind, every step echoing inside her chest. The wind picked up, carrying distant noises. Leaves rustled. Branches snapped under hooves. The riders were too close now. They reached a point where the ridge narrowed into a ledge no wider than a wagon plank. The warrior stepped across first, sure-footed. Lyra hesitated, staring at the drop below. Her legs trembled. The warrior extended his hand, calling her forward with a steady look. She placed her foot carefully and held his hand as she crossed. It was the longest few breaths she had taken in her life. They made it across. But the newcomer stopped suddenly and raised his spear. Lyra froze. A rustle came from the trees above. A figure stepped out, not one of the riders, but a man dressed in worn frontier gear. His face carried the roughness of someone used to hard travel. He held no weapon, but his presence felt neither safe nor friendly. The newcomer tensed. The warrior stepped slightly in front of Lyra. The stranger lifted his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. He said he had been tracking the riders for days. He claimed he knew why they hunted Lyra. He said he knew about the old map. And he said something that made the forest seem to stop breathing altogether. He claimed Joran never lost the map. He claimed Joran hid it somewhere only Lyra could find. Lyra felt her heart lurch. The warrior stepped closer to the stranger, asking how he knew such things. The stranger said he had once worked alongside Joran. He claimed the map pointed to land richer and more valuable than anyone knew. He claimed the riders wanted to seize it before the truth spread. Lyra's pulse hammered inside her. She tried to speak, but words failed her. The stranger stepped forward, telling her he could lead her to the place where her husband left his final message. But before he could finish, the sound of a horse's whinny shattered the moment. The riders had reached the ridge. The warrior grabbed Lyra's arm, pulling her behind him. The newcomer raised his spear. The stranger drew a hidden knife, though he kept glancing between them as if unsure whom to help. The air filled with tension thick enough to choke. Branches snapped. Hooves thundered closer. Voices shouted commands. The riders had found them, and the truth they sought was seconds away from being forced into the open. Whether Lyra was ready or not, the ridge shook under the pounding hooves as the riders charged through the trees. Lyra felt the warrior pull her back against the rock wall, shielding her with his body while the newcomer positioned himself at the ledge with his spear raised. The stranger, who claimed to know Joran's secrets, stepped to the side, his knife ready, his breathing steady. For a moment the air felt split between three different worlds, each one deciding its next move as danger closed in like a tightening rope. The first rider burst through the brush, rifle lifted. But before he could aim, the warrior moved with lightning speed, knocking the man off his horse with the end of his spear. The rider tumbled to the ground and scrambled away, stunned but alive. Another pushed forward, shouting orders. The stranger stepped in front, blocking his path long enough for the newcomer to strike the ground near the horse's hooves. The animal reared, forcing the rider to fall back. Lyra stayed behind the rock, hands pressed to her chest, feeling her heart leap with every sound. She watched the warrior with wide eyes. His movements held force and precision, but also restraint. He fought to protect, not to destroy. The newcomer matched that skill, every motion shaped by purpose, not anger. The riders, realizing they were outmatched by the terrain and the quick defense of the warriors, backed away and began circling. Their leader rode forward, face red with frustration, voice cutting through the ridge. He shouted that Lyra carried something that belonged to them. He shouted that her husband had stolen what was theirs. His threats echoed down the valley. Lyra stepped out from behind the rock, her courage rising even as fear trembled in her legs. The warrior tried to pull her back, but she shook her head gently. She knew she could not hide forever. She faced the leader and raised her voice. Steady, though, her hands shook. She said she carried nothing belonging to them, that she knew nothing of old secrets except for what her husband once tried to mend. The leader laughed, claiming she was lying. He said the land promised to the settlers generations ago had been stolen by Apache elders, and Joran had found proof. He said the map would have freed the land for the town, and they refused to let that slip away. The stranger behind Lyra stepped forward and yelled that the leader was twisting the truth. He revealed that he once worked under the same man, and that greed, not justice, drove their actions. The settlers who followed the leader wanted more land than they had any right to claim. They wanted the water source hidden in the valley. They wanted full control, not peace. The leader's face darkened. He lifted his rifle toward the stranger, accusing him of betrayal. But before he could fire, the warrior stepped between them and raised his spear, his stance rooted like an unmovable oak. The newcomer flanked him, and together they stood as a wall. The leader hesitated. He saw he was outmatched in will, not just strength. He lowered his weapon slowly. The remaining riders exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of their next move. Lyra stepped forward again, voice gentle yet firm. She said her husband had wanted peace. She said he carried messages for those who hoped to bridge the gap between Apache and settlers. She said he never wanted the land taken from anyone. Her words seemed to settle something in the air. Even the wind grew quieter. The stranger spoke next, saying he knew where Joran hid his final message. He said it was not a map of claim or greed. It was a letter. A letter describing the land as shared, not stolen. A letter stating that both sides had equal right to water and space, as long as they honored old boundaries and respected each other. The leader clenched his jaw. Lyra watched his face soften with a mix of guilt and stubborn anger. He finally signaled his riders to lower their weapons. They backed away slowly, realizing the truth weighed against them heavier than any fight they could win today. As the riders retreated down the ridge, the forest seemed to breathe again. Lyra sank to her knees, weak with relief. The warrior knelt beside her, steadying her with his hand. She met his eyes, feeling gratitude so strong it tightened her throat. He had carried her through danger without knowing anything about her world. Yet he protected her as if her life mattered as much as his own. The newcomer stood guard until the last echo of hooves faded. Then he turned to the stranger and asked where Joran's letter was hidden. The stranger nodded toward the valley below and began leading them along a narrow trail. Lyra followed with the warrior at her side, the tension slowly loosening from her body. They reached a small hollow where a lone cedar tree grew beside a cluster of rocks. The stranger paused there, knelt, and moved a stone aside. Beneath it lay a small wooden box, weathered by sun and rain, but still intact. Lyra gasped softly. She knew this box. She had seen it once in her home years ago, before Joran took it with him on his last journey. The stranger handed it to her. She opened the lid with trembling hands. Inside lay a folded letter wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it carefully, the paper fragile but clear. Her husband's handwriting marked the page with care in the letter. Joran wrote that he had worked with the elder to create a document that would protect both Apache and settlers. He explained that the land could not be claimed fully by either side without breaking old agreements. He spoke of the water source as sacred to the Apache and essential to the settlers. He asked that both sides agree to let the valley remain shared, neither owned nor seized. Lyra pressed the letter to her chest, tears rising, but not from sorrow, from pride, from love, from the realization that her husband had carried the weight of peace on his shoulders, even when it cost him everything. The warrior read the letter too, his eyes softening. The newcomer nodded, saying this truth would end the dispute for good. The stranger added that exposing the letter publicly would prevent the riders from stirring trouble again. Even their leader would have to accept it. Lyra felt the weight lift from her spirit. She looked up at the warrior. His gaze rested on her with a calm that felt like morning sunlight after a long storm. She thanked him quietly for saving her, for protecting her when she had nothing left but fear. He told her she had shown strength no one expected. He said her courage carried the spirit of someone meant to change things as they walked back toward the clearing. The sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the land in warm gold. The birds returned to their branches. The forest felt alive again, no longer filled with chase and fear. The stranger left them, promising he would ride into town and share the truth. The newcomer returned to his tribe to spread word of Joran's letter. Lyra remained with the warrior near the stream, where quiet water flowed over smooth stones. She looked at him and felt something new growing between them. Not fear, not uncertainty. Something steady. Something warm. Something born from survival, trust, and shared truth. He reached out and gently touched her hand. She looked up at him as the wind brushed past, carrying the soft scent of earth and pine. She felt safe in a way she had not felt in months. She felt seen. The warrior told her she was welcome among his people. He said the valley was open to her now. She smiled softly, feeling for the first time that the world ahead held promise, held peace, held a path she had not yet imagined. They walked together across the quiet land, leaving behind the echoes of conflict and stepping into a future shaped by courage, unity, and the hope Joran had once tried to protect. And as the stars rose above them, Lyra knew her story would not end with fear. It would end with strength, with healing, with a new beginning beside the man who saved her when the world turned dark. A new beginning in the heart of the frontier she now called home.